Aha! We have another Brous in the house. Stay tuned for an initial review of the Brous Bionic. Hi gang, Rob here. It's the evening of 31 January 2014. We're hanging out here at the sharpening bench tonight, and actually I had every intention of pulling this baby out of the box, setting up the Edge Pro, and putting a proper edge on the Brous Bionic. Belongs to one of my YouTube subscribers and new sharpening customer, Jesse. But a funny thing happened on the way to the sharpening bench tonight, and we'll talk about that in the context of doing a first impressions video on this knife, or an initial review, I guess. Well, let's take a look and see what we got. You saw that nice corrugated cardboard box, which houses this attractive plastic cylinder. Pop the top here, isn't that cool? Inside the cylinder resides the knife, and in the bottom of the cylinder a nice little foam rubber cushion with a hole cut out of the middle for the knife to rest, and keeps it right dead in the middle, and pretty cool. And also the certificate of authenticity from Jason Brous. That is the owner of Brous Blades. We are pleased to offer you a certificate of authenticity for your semi-custom Brous Blades folder. This document certifies that this product is one of a limited 1,100 piece run. Thank you for supporting Brous Blades. This one born, looks like November 1st, 2013. On the cylinder, we're proudly made in the USA. So let's put the materials aside and get to the knife. The Bionic, I believe, did we see this knife first at Blade last year? I don't think it was on Jason's table at SHOT 2013, but I know it was at Blade. And when I first saw a video of this knife, I was a brand new Division flipper owner, and this sort of EDC size Brous was a very attractive prospect to me. And I've sort of held off getting one, and didn't really know why. And then last week, Jesse, the owner of this knife, contacted me and asked me if I could sharpen it for him. And you know, I was pretty stoked actually to be able to have one here at the sharpening bench and in front of the review camera for you guys. And I thought, well, it'll give me a good opportunity to evaluate this little blade before I decide whether I want to invest in one. Well, let's talk about what we got here. It is very definitely an everyday carry pocket knife. It is constructed of beautifully machined 6061 aluminum scales with stainless steel liners, and you can sort of see them as they emerge from the aluminum where the liner lock is, and then on the spine of the knife back by the tail we see some exposed liner, which is kind of interesting, I think. Knife is 4 inches long closed. Has a 3-inch long blade. I would call this a modified sheep's foot, I guess. 3 inches long of, you guessed it, D2 tool steel. I love that stuff. One of the things that really attracted me to this blade is the blade steel. We have a deeply and rather high hollow ground blade. Appears to be, I guess that's 1/8 inch stock. Perfect. You know, perfect for a beefy, smaller EDC blade. Very interesting detail here. Near the spine of the blade there is a fuller. I don't think I'd call it a blood groove on a knife like this, but it's actually, it helps lighten the knife, which weighs in, guys, at a very svelte 2.5 ounces by my scale. I think Jason probably listed at 2.7 if I remember right, but I weighed it 3 times, got 2.5 ounces every time. So it definitely removes a little weight from the knife, gives it kind of a cool spine profile. And also, in addition to the flipper, it gives you an alternate method of deployment. A little awkward till you get used to it. It seems like it wants to have your thumb kind of far from the pivot to actuate easily using that method. Primarily though, it's a flipper knife. It does ride on what Jason calls a proprietary ball bearing pivot system. Okay, let's talk about some more things I really like about this knife. Because we're going to have, I think, a significant portion of this review that talks about some problems with the knife. So, lest I forget, we're going to get the positives. Get the positives out on the table first, because I don't want to get bogged down in the negative and forget to get to the positives. So we talked about the beautifully machined handle. Now I want to get to ergonomics. I've got the clip, as Jesse sent it to me, set up for right hand carry, so I'm going to primarily use my right hand. If you look where my fingers are falling, I've got 1 in the primary choil, 2 in this next radius, and my thumb kind of, it does catch that last sort of dip in the handle, and it catches it rather well. So in a saber grip, we're pretty good, except for one issue in the choil of the knife, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes. Yeah. So that grip pretty comfortable. If you go into a hammer grip, for as short as this handle is, this hammer grip is really comfortable. You know, if we were doing some hard cutting, I've got good contact between spine of the handle and my hand right here behind my index finger. Blade's very stable in that grip. The only complaint I have in the hammer grip is this sort of pointy flipper does dig into the knuckle of the index finger a little bit, but you know, probably not a super hard use knife, so that's maybe not going to be an issue. In a draw cut grip, again, I've got that same issue with the flipper hitting, and guys, many small flipper knives have this same sort of ergonomics problem. So we're not going to ding the knife too bad there. In a reverse grip, should you ever have to use it, not bad, but again, there's that flipper kind of digging into my pinky. But all in all, pretty good ergos for a flipper, and a small flipper to boot. Let's talk about jimping for a minute. We've got some absolutely perfect jimping on the spine of the blade. It is functional, it is sharp without being painful, it locks my thumb in, just can't beat it. Well, we'll get to this jimping when we start talking about negatives, because the jimping in the handle, it's just not good, and we'll get to that. The hardware on this knife is beautiful. The pivot is a custom Brous pivot. The pocket clip is a custom Brous clip. It is, you know, it is spring steel, you know, normal stainless steel clip, but very nicely shaped. And Jason has chosen to, he always identifies his stuff like boldly and discreetly at the same time. Nice laser etch in the pocket clip Brous blades. And then let's see if we can make this out. Guys, my eyes just, I didn't wear my reading glasses down here. But the serial number, the run number of 1100 is right here on the inside of the flipper. Hope the camera picks that up. The knife does have pillar construction with what appear to be, again, custom, sort of modified hourglass standoffs. Very attractive. Don't know what material those are. I got a hunch they're aluminum though. The liners on this knife, of course, are steel. Let's see if you can get a peek in there. Nicely skeletonized on the off side from the lock, as Jason does sort of regularly, and I'll bet you the lock side is probably not skeletonized as usual. Actually, there is a lightning hole. See if you guys can see that right in the back of the knife. Not much to be done up here where the lock is. That's kind of got to all be there. Of course, with the ball bearing pivot, you expect good flipping action. I would say for a bearing pivot, this takes just a little getting used to. You know what? Jesse told me that he put Tough Glide in this knife. And while we're doing this video, let's throw a little Daiwa reel oil in here. I have not had super great experience with Tough Glide and bearing pivots, and especially around detents. So I'm going to put a few drops of our Daiwa reel oil in our pivot. One of the best ideas I've had in a long time, and it wasn't mine. The preferred knife lubricant of One All's Pub, and now of mine as well. Let's see if that works in. This gets any better. I've just had Tough Glide do funny things to ball bearings. I'm going to get greasy all over. Excuse me for a blade wipe. And guys, this pivot, I guess even for Jesse, it was starting to get a little screechy. And I don't know that it was the pivot as much as it was the detent ball. Now that ought to help. Anyhow, as with most of these modern flippers on ball bearings, we've got a super strong detent, and for some reason Jason really loves to make pointy flippers, and I think he does that because he really doesn't design his flippers to be push button where my force is going down this way primarily, because you know it kind of digs into your finger. I had the same issue with my division. There we go. Now it's starting to flip a little better. However, and this is sort of the first negative we're going to talk about, if this is a pull type flipper, and its contour would definitely say that it is. Let's look closely. Yeah, we're back to this spine jimping. If I lay my finger down as I normally would with a pull flipper on the spine of the knife and I pull back, guys, that is positively painful. And it doesn't even flip very well. Ow. The reason it doesn't flip very well is because the anticipation of that sort of keeps you from doing it. Maybe if I go way up high on it, and for some reason the pocket clip really seems to come into play when I take that pull flipping grip. If I get back here and I do that push button, I don't really notice the clip as much, but it interferes. But this jimping on the spine, this last peak, I don't know if you guys can hear that. I mean, that is just very sharp and grabby, and I bet if you look close, there's some skin in there. Yeah, that's just not good. And I really don't understand why it's even there. There's really, this jimping in the blade is so good. We would just be better off if the spine of the handle were smooth, to let you really dig into that flipper and give it a good pull. So this might be one of those cases where, you know, satisfying a buzzword of the modern forum and YouTube knife community, we might have gone overboard this time. This might be sort of some jump the shark jimping, kind of like ZT is known for in some of their hinderer designs. Jimping in places that it doesn't need to be and too sharper than it needs to be. This might be one of those. Let's talk about the blade shape. I want to get back to some positives. For a utility, everyday carry knife, I love this blade shape. It's robust enough. It's robust enough to be strong and do some light prying. It is ground thinly enough in this hollow grind to be a great little slicer. We have a point that is acute enough to dig a splinter, maybe if it had to, and we've got enough belly, just enough belly, that we're not going to be, you know, wearing our tip out prematurely. We can do a lot of cutting right here in this area of the knife. Just a great little EDC blade shape and overall design. Very thin in pocket. You know, the aluminum handled knives let you go pretty skinny and still stay strong, which is why so many of these, so many knives of this size class use aluminum handles. Benchmade 940. Super sweet. Let's see, how's our flipping action now? The Daiwa's starting to do its job. I think we've loosened up some of the dry lubricant or dry seizing agent in the Tough Glide, and now we're starting to roll pretty well. Okay, and let's see, how's it close? Just sort of, yeah, pretty well. For a blade that's not very heavy, it's very free. Not a lot of inertia, but still making the most out of that ball bearing pivot. Okay, now, so this is a blade I anticipated greatly, really wanted to like, and I was very excited to get it in for sharpening. Now we're going to get to the negatives, and there is a bit of a list. And before I get started down that road, there are some of the negatives that are just plain problems. Already sort of made contact with Jason about them on behalf of Jesse, the owner of this knife, because they're going to need to be corrected. Actually posted some pictures and explanations today on Instagram if you follow me there. By the way, my name on Instagram is the same as it is on YouTube. So a lot of times I'll post pictures on there before I make video reviews of knives, so you can kind of see what's coming on the YouTube channel if you follow me on Instagram. But I did post a couple pictures on Instagram today of this knife and some of the issues that we're having with it. And, Jason didn't take too long to find them, and we just exchanged a couple comments, and I'll be Jesse and I will both be talking to him on Monday, and he's assured both of us that the problems we're going to talk about tonight are going to be corrected. So, as we would expect with Jason, he's a one-man show. He has always been extremely responsive to customer issues, and is the easiest guy to get a hold of in the knife making world. If he can't answer his phone and you leave him a voicemail, he will get back to you. I've had a couple occasions to talk to him, and he's just awesome. So from that standpoint, running a new business that's dependent on the goodwill of customers, Jason does a great job. Okay, let's start with number one, and I guess it's getting to be old and tired, isn't it? You know, if you follow my channel and you follow Brous Blades, there is a blade design element that I just perceive to be a problem. Jason doesn't seem to want to get away from it, and I despise it. And you can call it an opinion if you want. I think it's more of a fact, and what I'm going to talk about, most of you guys can see this coming if you're looking. We have what should be cutting edge that comes back to here, we have a plunge grind from full stock thickness to main blade grind that comes out to about here. Okay? That results in a cutting edge, or what should be a cutting edge at the base of the blade, that thickens, widens, and gets generally goofy as it tries to absorb that plunge grind without being goofy, which is impossible because it's there. If we look at it from this angle, don't know how well this is going to show up on camera, but at the base of the edge grind, from the perspective you're looking at it, the cutting edge takes a pretty abrupt turn to the right. It is quite off center, and if you can get a picture of that angle, the secondary bevel angle, the edge grind, it's about 70 or 80 degrees inclusive. Yeah, I said 70 or 80 degrees because, as we've talked about before in my division flipper video, as this edge grind approaches the base, in order to come up this plunge grind and not be a 1/4 inch wide, it has to increase in angle, resulting in a dull, wide base of the cutting edge. And I guess it's especially critical on a knife this small because we've only got 3 inches of cutting edge, and we use up a 1/4 inch, well, about 3/8 of an inch of it in trying to make a plunge grind area look right. It's not functional. It doesn't look good. So what to do? What to do? Well, on my division flipper, I made this notch, which to me has no explanation. It's not a sharpening notch. It's not a finger choil. It's just there, and it doesn't do anything. Either we need a tighter plunge grind, or we need to move this notch farther down the blade, or a combination of both, or we need a forward finger choil, like a hinderer. You know, hinderer knives have a big old plunge grind, and Rick makes a large radius finger choil and cutting edge that comes all the way to the back or to the front of that choil. As you can see, this might as well be a finger choil because it's just not very sharp. Just not. So I talked to Jesse about this issue tonight, and when this knife returns from Brous Blades, getting some other issues resolved, it's going to have a finger choil in it. And it's going to have good sharp cutting edge all the way to the base. I don't know how well the camera picks this up, but it's just not good. Okay, then here's another thing I was noticing. This is an anodized aluminum scale knife, and it comes in many colors. This is like a gunmetal gray. It comes in blue, green, orange, probably black. I'm sure there's a pink one. There's got to be a pink one. What I've noticed over the years with anodized aluminum knife handles is that anywhere that there's a sharp corner, we're going to wear on that anodizing. And Jason's done a pretty good job of protecting the sharp corners of this knife. You know, like in these machined areas, the outside corners are nicely rounded and or chamfered. We're probably going to have some issues on this jimping over time. But what I really noticed more than anything else was the inside edges of the handle scales are extremely sharp. And over time, those are going to wear. And we're going to see exposed aluminum. That just is what it is. Blade centering on this knife, pretty good. If anything, it favors the lock bar side, so as it wears in and loosens up a little, it'll come to the center. No big deal there. We talked about the spine jimping already. Now I want to look at lockup, because this, in my eyes, is the most glaring problem with this knife. If we look, yeah, let's see, get that to focus for you guys. That lock bar is very thin, less than a 1/16 of an inch, and it is stainless. The liners are stainless on this knife. If you look closely, lockup is extremely early. In fact, so early that the entire width of the lock bar does not engage the blade tang. and let's just take a little detour, because I think there's an unfortunate trend in the knife community that Jason might have fallen victim of here. I don't know. I haven't looked at 50 of these to see where they all lock up. I mean, we're just dealing with this one. But groupthink in the knife community says, the most insanely early lockup I can have, the better. I want it to lock up early. It's got to have early lockup. Well, okay, I get that sort of. On a titanium frame lock that's going to wear and the lock is going to move over, we want it to have room to move over without smacking the other handle scale. However, a couple problems arise when we have what I call stupid early lockup. Even on a titanium frame lock, if we're only engaging, let's say 10-15 thousandths of that lock bar with the blade tang, and we spine whack that knife, I don't care if the lock bar is 1/8 of an inch, 3/16 of an inch thick. If we only have 10 thousandths of it hanging onto the blade tang, it's going to get sheared off. How strong is that? Not very. And then if you've got a liner lock knife, as this one is, with a pretty thin liner, you get a whole other dynamic going on from a frame lock. If I'm gripping a frame lock tightly, and the lock bar is here, my index finger is pushing that lock bar into the blade tang. No matter what I do with that knife, the lock bar is not going to come disengaged, no matter how early it is, because I'm holding it in. Not only the tension of the lock bar spring, but my hand is holding that thing in because I'm pressing in against the side of the knife. Not true in a liner lock. What my hand's pressing against is this handle scale, which doesn't move and protects the liner. What you do have, though, in a liner lock is a situation like this. If you're in a saber grip and you're digging into some work, and for some reason, let's say you're digging in a piece of wood and you're trying to maybe pop off a chunk, and you're torquing that blade, your index finger can actually move that liner, and oh, I'm gripping the knife tightly. I'm not trying to deploy the liner lock, and I twist the blade and it's closed. I was so alarmed that this was going to be the case with this knife, and it was, that this is an experiment that I repeated this afternoon, I don't know, 40 or 50 times, and look what happened to my index finger. What? That's not the blade cutting me. No, it's not. What that is, guys, and I hope you can see that. Yeah, that picture you saw clearly shows that the way that this locking liner is jimped and then cut so that it comes over into the lock channel leaves that very last jimp, for lack of a better word, it leaves about half of one, and it leaves it as a spike that sticks up over the top of the blade tang, so that when your hand is engaged in it, it literally digs in like a spike. I have a real hard time understanding how that makes it into production. Jason, I don't mean to pile on here, but there's a statement in the text description of this knife on the Brous Blades website that talks about 6 months of testing and repetitive reliability. Well, guys, I'll guarantee you that if I carried this knife for 6 months and used it, there's no way it could get into production like that. Not with lockup that early, and not with the locking liner having a spike on the end of it. I mean, and I've watched some other videos today just to make sure this wasn't an aberration. That spike is there on, well, I watched 3 videos that I could actually see it clearly. That spike was present in all 3. So, this knife is going to go back to Brous blades the first part of the week. We'll see what we can do about this, see what we can do about adjusting that lockup. And, you know, frankly, that's not a big deal. It's just a matter of removing a little material from either blade tang or lock bar and having it lock up more toward the middle of the blade. No big deal. And maybe getting this rather harsh jimping, especially that last one, out of the way a little bit so it doesn't grab our finger and cause the lock to be released and cut us up. And here, you know, here's sort of what I'm thinking. This is just a general characterization. This is my opinion. When we look at the other knives that this thing competes against in the market, and you know, Jason made a decision not to make $300 or $400 or $500 custom knives, or he didn't decide to stop, but he decided to move out of that niche and come in with what I guess you'd have to classify as a mid-tech, because I believe some of the sources and components on this, or some of the processes and components on this knife are sourced. He's decided to do a semi-production or mid-tech knife at a price level that competes with some pretty fine production knives in this size class. I could have brought them down here to the basement for comparison, but you guys all know them. This is a knife that sells for $159, and it's aluminum. Well, I know of an aluminum knife that sells for about $10 or $15 more than that, and it's a legend. It's the Benchmade 940. We don't see these kinds of issues with the Benchmade 940. We don't see it, you know, rip skin off our finger when we try to open it. We don't see the lock collapse when it's being used hard. We don't see our user's grip draw blood. You know, those kinds of things. Although it has some issues from time to time at the base of the blade, none of them are really by design. They're more by way of process variability, which happens in a production knife. It just happens to be in a critical area, but this is just something that's designed into the knife, and it's designed badly. You know, what else is in this price class? Spyderco Paramilitary 2. You know, an ergonomic dream with no offensive characteristics. That's a little less expensive knife than this. You know, how about the Spyderco Domino? You know, still under $200. And you know, I guess my point here would be, if we're going to compete in that what I would call sort of high-line production knife class, price-wise, we better make sure we got a production process that's worthy of those competitors, because and you know, some of the problems I'm talking about here are correctable mistakes. Some of them are just the design of the knife. You know, this plunge grind is a design problem. This locking liner is just a badly written CAD program that resulted in a badly designed liner lock that made it into production, because nobody caught that. And if one is like this, they're probably all like this. You know, I don't see that being a very variable item. You know, we could have saved some machining time by doing away with this kind of horrendous jimping in the spine of the handle, and maybe making a chamfer pass on the inside edges of the aluminum scales to make them wear better over time. And I don't think they really grab you. Yeah, they do kind of grab your skin. So, you know, my general appraisal of this knife is, you know, quality problems aside, there are still some other problems. Some characteristics of the knife, some design problems that just aren't really competitive in the price range of this knife. That sort of hard use small to medium sized EDC blade for $150 to $200. So, is the Bionic a cool little knife? Yes, it is. It's great looking, great materials, pretty good ergonomics with a couple fixes. Is it ready to compete with 940s, Dominoes, and paramilitary 2s in its present form? No. In its present form, even after, even after Jason fixes the things that are wrong specifically with this knife, still not one in its present form that I would recommend. Having said that, and that's news I don't like to deliver, guys. Having said that, I have a lot of respect for Jason Brous. I love his ingenuity. I love his vision that says there's no project I could tackle that I can't get done. The kid's he's afraid of nothing, and I'll bet you, if I were a betting man, he'll get this knife right. Whether it ends up being a Bionic or whether he brings another sort of small, lightweight EDC blade to market, he'll fix what's wrong. So stay tuned, guys. There will be a follow-up video to this. Unless plans change, I'm going to ship this back to Jason from my place and have the replacement shipped back here, at which point we're going to put a choil in the blade and put an Apostle P edge on it. And then we'll get it back to Jesse so he can enjoy it. And I'm sure he will. Grace to you and peace, my friends, from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. And remember, the word is sharp.